All throughout last year, the left was screaming, defund the police. They said we need social workers to deal with many of these circumstances, so we don't need to send in police. Now, I think there's a fair assessment that says there are probably certain circumstances where a community officer and a social worker can help. Defunding the police is the opposite of what you would need to do if you wanted to bring more people on. You need to actually fund the police. In the wake of the calls for defunding the police, we actually saw departments and cities, various jurisdictions, actually take away funding from their departments. In Minneapolis, where all of this started with the George Floyd riots, they actually defunded their police department, and it resulted in a major wave of crime. Now, some people say it wasn't the fault of defunding the police. You're wrong. But many news articles and many locals are saying that's exactly what happened. And because of it, Minneapolis is now spending $6.4 million to recruit new officers. So when they defunded police and crime began to skyrocket, and then the city decided we're going to spend millions of dollars to bring cops back, I think it's fair to assess the crime was the result, or at least perceived to be the result, of defunding the police. But of course, like with the COVID lockdown, Democrat politicians cannot let a good crisis go to waste. It appears now that there is an ongoing effort to use the crime we are seeing to propagandize in an effort to get more gun control. And of course, Joe Biden made it a campaign promise. He said, we're going to ban the online sale of firearms and ammunition. And he absolutely intends to push for more gun control. Today, in actual news, the actual story that's coming out, the House passed H.R. 8, which expands background checks. And this is what I want to start with to show you the Democrats are serious. And there's even some Republicans who are not really conservatives or Republicans siding with the Democrats to pass this bill, which basically says in any capacity, any sale has to be done with the background check. I guess it would ban the private sale of firearms. They're calling it the Charleston loophole. But that's not the biggest story. The biggest story, perhaps, is a collection of articles that pop up on Google when you type in a certain phrase, and you can see across the board, there is a coordinated series of news articles making it seem as though the crime wave we are seeing is the result of guns and that we need gun control to deal with it, ignoring the fact that much of the crime we saw over the past year could be attributed to defunding the police. It could be attributed to police not wanting to engage in certain ways because some officers are facing criminal prosecution for doing their jobs. Well, I'll always be the first to say police reform, absolutely. It seems like they're exploiting the increase in homicides caused by defunding the police in some jurisdictions to justify gun control. I won't waste time. I'll show you right in the introduction before we read into gun control law that's coming. This from Google. All you need do is type in mass shootings surge. And what do you see? Mass shooting surge in Florida as nation faces record high. Then right below it, mass shooting surge in Tennessee as nation faces record high. Mass shootings in Wisconsin as nation faces record high. In South Carolina, record high. In New York, in Ohio. And then the one that stands out, mass shootings in fall in Indiana. But nation faces record high. Why are all of these different news outlets, supposedly different news outlets, writing nearly identical articles, but centralizing the story on the locality? Each and every one of these articles references gun control is needed. I'll make it simple. I am not saying there's a grand conspiracy necessarily. It may just be they're exploiting fear over crime, as news outlets do, to generate clicks. But whether it's intentional or not, it is resulting in a justification for more gun control. I want to read the story about H.R. 8 and explain to you what's going on and what Democrats are doing. But I do want to point out, I believe we are going to see a major push for gun control under Joe Biden. And I want to talk about how it doesn't really make sense. I know there's a lot of people who watch who are way more knowledgeable on firearms than I am. But over the past year, I've become much more of a individual protecting the Second Amendment, and I own many firearms. So I'll talk to you about some of my experiences and what I think may result from what's going on. Put it simply, the left called for defunding the police. Crime skyrocketed. And now the media is saying, got to take away all the guns. It's the only answer. Perhaps the answer is actually to let people defend themselves and also respect police, but reform them. Before we get started, however, go to timcast.com and become a member to get access to exclusive segments and episodes from the Timcast IRL podcast. We have a bunch of really great segments and episodes that you can check out. And when you become a member, you help support and protect my podcasts and my show because, at any point we could get banned. They want to take away your guns. They really do. They've said it as much. Now, there are certain individuals who say, no one's coming for your guns. But of course, Beto O'Rourke, what did he say? Heck yes, we are. I firmly believe they do want to. And the more conversations I have about what constitutes an assault weapon, the more it really does feel like this is just a power grab. Now, for most of you who are watching, who are not gun owners or big on gun rights and don't really care, the reason why I'm covering this is not necessarily about gun control and gun rights. It's about media manipulation, as it usually is on my channel. When I saw that these stories were coordinated and nearly identical, it kind of creeped me out. Because even if it's an accident, it plays into that trope we saw way back with the Deadspin video. Did you see this? When it showed all the local news outlets all saying the exact same things. This is very dangerous to our democracy in unison. We think we're getting independent and local news. We are not. It is coordinated, it is pre-written, and it serves a purpose. Whether it was the intent of these news outlets or not, it will fuel a narrative. And that narrative is the crime can only be stopped with gun control. Well, then you have no police because they've defunded the police. Then you have no weapons to protect yourself. And the criminals who don't care about the law will be armed. And why would any sane person argue for that? Let's get started with this. I want to show you the news on H.R. 8, the actual gun control bill that was passed, because for one, it's legitimately happening right now. It is a bill that's going to affect all of us. And I believe it shows the seriousness of the Democrats in their efforts to enforce new gun control bills. USA Today says House passes bills expanding background checks for gun sales, closing Charleston loophole. They say, what H.R. 8 does and doesn't do? They say H.R. 8, a background checks package meant to enhance reviews of those seeking to acquire firearms, would not create a firearms registry or other federal mechanisms for review. Instead, the legislation would expand the cases in which a background check is required for the sale or transfer of a firearm, including for private individuals and groups selling or transferring firearms, closing the gun show loophole. The requirement would apply to online sales. The bill would make it illegal for anyone who is not a licensed firearm importer, manufacturer, or dealer to trade or sell firearms to another person. Current federal law requires background checks only for licensed gun dealers. Non-licensed individuals who would like to sell or trade weapons could do so through a licensed firearm dealer who would run the necessary background checks. As with much legislation today, the bill faces an uncertain future in the Senate, where Republican lawmakers largely remain obstinate to any gun control measures. The bill passed with a few Republican votes, signaling there may be support among the GOP for such measures. People could still temporarily trade and share firearms at shooting ranges, on hunting trips, and when it's necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm under new regulations. This bill makes no sense. And let me explain. If you go online, say to gunbroker.com, and you seek to purchase a firearm. So Gunbroker allows various stores and individuals to sell firearms. It still has to be transported to an FFL. This is a store that is certified by the government to do a background check and sell you a weapon. To put it simply, if I go online and say I would like to purchase this firearm, it cannot be sent to my home. It is sent to a store. When I walk into that store to do a transfer, I have to fill out a form and go through a background check through what's called NICS, N-I-C-S. I don't understand, and perhaps maybe I'll have to read through the whole bill itself to try and break down the nuances. I don't understand what Democrats are trying to do when they're basically saying, if you want to sell something, you got to go through a store. It essentially means that you can't go to Arms List and list your firearm and transfer it through a store, or you already have to do that. So is it just meaningless, garbled nonsense? I'd say so. Earlier today, I saw someone post about banning assault weapons, and they said no self-respecting hunter would use an assault weapon to go and hunt. It's a nonsensical statement. Let me try to help inform those who don't know a lot about this. And I'm learning, in the past year, where I live, certain weapons are illegal. I mean, in most places, in like the entire country, there are certain weapons that are illegal. Don't get me wrong. But there are certain things that make no sense. For instance, a carbine, for example, is a small caliber long gun. Essentially, I mean, some people might argue and they'll say, Tim, you're wrong. But You might have a weapon that has a folding stock and takes a small caliber bullet. A folding stock just means the part that goes in your shoulder, you can press a button and it folds in for easy storage. That would be considered in some jurisdictions an assault weapon. Well, this individual posted to Facebook saying that no self-respecting hunter would use that. And I'm like, maybe there's no reason to use that version of assault weapon for hunting. But have you ever actually looked at what constitutes an actual hunting rifle? For instance, there's something called a 450 Bushmaster. I'm only recently becoming familiar with a lot of this stuff, so forgive me for those that know a lot more than I do. Feel free to comment and correct anything I might get wrong. But there are semi-automatic 450 Bushmasters with polymer tips, and that's what you would use for hunting, and they're used for taking down buck, which are bigger and heavier than humans. What do you mean no self-respecting hunter would use an assault weapon? Assault weapon has no clear definition, like a pistol grip, the way you hold it, certain things you put on it. There's a lot of reasons why people might use what's constituted as an assault weapon by some definitions to go hunting with. But think about what I mentioned earlier about smaller caliber weapons. Those can be significantly less devastating to a person. Like a weapon for hunting is meant to take down bigger game. I suppose if someone was hunting turkeys or pheasants, they might not use something big. But these people have no idea what they're talking about when it comes to weapons. Well, let's get to the nitty gritty. I know maybe there's a lot of people who say, Tim, I don't really care about firearms and all this stuff. I think you should because it's in the Constitution. And as Dave Chappelle said, the Second Amendment is just there in case the first one doesn't work out. And that was an incredible statement by Dave Chappelle, who is not a conservative. As I showed you early, just go to Google and search this, and it is the craziest thing. The media manipulation in this country, maybe it's not conscious, but it is still creepy. It's happening. Well, let me put it this way. It's definitely conscious. There's no way they accidentally copied and replicated all of these articles, but targeted localities. I would say this. Simple solution. Maybe it just makes more sense that USA Today Networks, which publishes these articles, sent out a pre-written script saying, take this story about mass shootings. It will shock people. It will scare them. If you make it about their locality, we'll get more money. We'll make more revenue. And in order to make the piece long, so we get people to stay on the page longer, include as much as you can politically about gun control. Maybe. Or maybe there are activist individuals who work for these companies who say, I want a big push on gun control. I would not be surprised. We know activists work in news outlets. I don't know their intent, so I'm not going to imply I have any evidence to suggest that's the case, other than they did this and it will result in sentiment favoring gun control. Maybe you're in favor of certain gun control, and that's fine. I know staunch 2A defenders who do think there could be reforms. I actually did a training program with the New Jersey Police Department where I met this very proficient shooter who said he actually thinks we need new gun control laws, but he also thinks we need to fix and get rid of some of the ones we have now. The general idea being some kind of uniformity. And I think he's right, actually. For instance, reciprocity. You could have a concealed carry permit in some states that don't mean anything in other states. I kind of think we should have more reciprocity. So if you've gone through the background check, if you've gone through the concealed carry, training program, and you are certified and qualified and licensed to do so, why should you get arrested because you were driving through a certain state? Now, I understand there are certain federal laws, but sometimes state police just don't care. Let me read for you some of these stories. As I showed you, we already have, they're all replications. They all say mass shooting surge in location as nation faces record high. They are the same. Newark Advocate. They say mass shootings in Ohio increased 25 in 2020 from the 14th year before, while nationally mass shootings jumped nearly 50% during the pandemic with crippling unemployment, violent protests, and idle youth. I don't think it's entirely unfair when they point out that, COVID lockdown and idle youth, poverty, and things like that played a role. But let's just search for the word control. And here we get a paragraph. Quote, but he adds that police departments likely will have to step up their efforts to get the estimated 50 to 100 million illegal guns in the country out of circulation. The gun control measures, often touted by President Joe Biden's administration, may also come into play, he said. These include measures aimed at keeping guns away from people who are a danger to themselves or others and creating a standard for gun storage. I started this archive in 2012, and my goal has always been to see that my job is eliminated. So far, that hasn't happened. Okay. He's not saying outright we must have gun control. But hold on. It's still saying Joe Biden wants to do these good things as standard. Joe Biden wants to ban the online sale. H.R. 8 wants to make it much more difficult for people to transfer weapons where it already is hard and you already have to go through what's called an FFL. Joe Biden wants to outright destroy online companies. There are many small businesses where you can buy ammunition, accessories, and weapons. Often these have to go through a gun store. You'll order them, but the weapons will be sent to a gun store. I think these people just don't know that. Joe Biden's bill would be devastating and wouldn't change anything. It doesn't quite make sense. So you can't buy online. So what do? You go to a gun store and then tell them you want to buy it? Perhaps it's innocuous, but it seems to many people I've spoken with at the range and at the gun stores, the fear is it's just another grain of sand in the heap that will ultimately result in the inability to own firearms. Many on the left say, well, you shouldn't be able to have warships or tanks, should you? They had warships. They were called corsairs and privateers. At the time the Constitution was being written, there were letters of marque for private ships that they basically said, go attack our enemies. Privately owned warships by American citizens. So they certainly have eroded our right to bear arms. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not entirely convinced people should have warships. I'm not entirely convinced warships are good in general, but I understand why they exist. And I suppose so long as the right is in that Constitution, it's not up for vote. Let's jump to the next article. The Chronicle Express, mass shooting surge in New York as nation faces record high. Okay, let's type in the word control. What's this? An identical paragraph at a different outlet targeting a locality? You see why that's creepy? It's the same thing. But he adds police departments will likely have to step up their efforts to get the illegal guns out of circulation. Joe Biden's plan may come into play. Okay, let's jump to the next article. Mass shooting surge in South Carolina. Let's type in the same word. There it is again. But he adds police departments will likely have to step up their efforts. Let's jump to the next one. Milwaukee, mass shooting surge in Wisconsin. Let's type in control again. The same paragraph exists in all of these. These are, at the very least, in my opinion, it's plagiarism, right? Are these written by different people? Marco Della Cava and Mike Stucca for the USA Today network. Okay, did all of these individuals write the same articles? It would seem they did. And what they did after writing the same article was they went in and just changed key tidbits. Personally, I think it's creepy. I don't think it's the apocalypse. I really do feel that they're just trying to maximize. It's something called location or A/B testing. They know that they will get more clicks if they focus specifically on where you live. But think about it. When people are targeted in this way, with a scary story, being told that these things are affecting them. Here's Florida. Florida, which has some fairly decent gun laws. Basically, people can own weapons fairly easily. Same paragraph, same paragraph, same paragraph. Now, the one that says mass shootings fall in Indiana is interesting. It still has the exact same paragraph. We need to get the guns off the street, even when they say mass shootings are falling. Here's the issue I take with all of this. The news is simple. Okay, well, no, it's not really that simple, but it's fairly simple in my opinion. From Fox News, February 14th. Minneapolis push to defund police backfires after residents complain of slow response times, increasing crime. The city council on Friday voted unanimously to approve $6.4 million in additional funding for the police department. So here's the gist of it. Maybe I got a little too in the weeds in the gun control stuff. I don't know. Maybe you're interested in that. What I end up seeing is that, for one, a lot of people have no idea what's happening or why, and they're willing to support gun control measures, even though the real problem may be defunding the police. It may be Democrat policies around locking down cities and destroying the economies, resulting in poverty, desperation, and crime. We know poverty breeds crime. So are the mass shootings and the homicides, the fatalities, a result more so of the lockdowns and defunding the police? Perhaps. Now, those articles do mention that. I want to be fair. But they also put in people's minds that Joe Biden is going to take action and get that gun control. And many people are going to read the headline and not the story. And when they read that headline, they're going to say, oh, no, mass shootings are on the rise around the country. What do we do? And they'll turn to the simple answer. A Democrat like Joe Biden, or even a Republican like Rep. Kinzinger, saying, we need gun reform. Kinzinger is supposedly a Republican from Illinois, and he's what many people, I guess, refer to as a FUD, an Elmer Fudd, I suppose it is. I wonder if I don't know if I have the actual, I think I have it. Here we go. Rep. Adam Kinzinger says, the vast majority of Americans believe in universal background checks. As a gun owner myself, I firmly support the Second Amendment, but I also believe we have to be willing to make some changes for the greater good. And then Michael Malice says you belong in jail. I don't completely agree with Michael Malice about Kinzinger going to jail. I'm not a big fan of establishment politicians, nor people like Kinzinger, who is certainly not a Republican. He's in Illinois. He kind of just pretends to be, I suppose. But I do think there can be changes made. I do believe we need, I think it's fair to say 100% reform the gun laws. I do. You know why? Too many of them make no sense. Make no sense in some jurisdictions. For instance, older weapons, or my favorite is that M1A, which is kind of an updated version to the M1 Garand. It's an old weapon, an old design. It's illegal in Maryland. And I believe it's called the SCAR 20, a more modern 308, which is basically the same round, not illegal. Why? Why is the old called an assault weapon? It makes no sense. So when I say reform, I mean it. We got to get rid of some of these laws. You know, that's the problem I have with a lot of these Republicans and people like Kinzinger. They will jump up and down screaming, we need more gun control, and never say, but we need to fix those ones that make no sense. Where are the Republicans saying we need to repeal these things and change these laws because they're not working? Anyway, I digress. The issue I see is, for one, it's disingenuous. They're exploiting the increase in crime to make it seem like it's an issue of guns as opposed to an issue of failed policies in major urban jurisdictions. They defunded their police. What are we supposed to expect from this? Now they're going to spend $6.4 million to recruit more officers? Well, it's no wonder crime is skyrocketing in these jurisdictions when you demonize and defunded police. I don't think that was the intended goal, to be honest, but the result is a fairly simple outline. Leftist rioters burned down cities with impunity after an individual lost his life. The police are blamed for this. And then we see two things. Jurisdictions actually took away money from police, making it harder for them to do their jobs. Many police were completely demoralized, quit, or refused to do their jobs. And if they refused, maybe they should be fired. But many of them said, don't expect me to go out there. We then saw the rise of autonomous zones. In Minneapolis, for instance, they created a new autonomous zone around what they call George Floyd Square, and there was recently a shooting. Someone died. We saw what happened in Georgia, where there was a little girl got shot because people set up another autonomous zone. It keeps happening. They set up these autonomous zones. The police don't go in. Shootings happen, and they say, oh, no, we got to get rid of the guns. Okay, you get rid of the guns, and you get rid of the police, and then you will be ruled by organized crime. It's that simple, man. I mean, for that matter, as most of you probably realize, it makes no sense to ban guns universally. It doesn't make sense. I'm sorry. Look, in places like West Virginia, you can easily and freely transfer guns between people. I was actually surprised to find that out, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. I'm very pro 2A, for sure. I got some really cool stuff I bought recently, but I also wonder this. I was talking to a gun shop recently, and I said, if I own a gun and, like in West Virginia, am I allowed to just sell it to somebody? And they said, yes, so long as they're legally allowed to own it. You can't knowingly transfer or sell a weapon to somebody who is not legally allowed to do it. However, they said, make sure you get it all in writing, file the paperwork so that you can prove that you sold it. And I'm like, wait, hold on. What do you mean by that? Well, if that person commits a crime with your weapon, they're going to come looking for you because when you bought it, they know who they may find out who that weapon was registered to or that serial number or things like that. So they said, make sure you document this stuff. And I was kind of like, if I'm going to do a transfer, I'm going to do it through an FFL because that protects me from liability. That just seems like, crossing the T's and dotting the I's. But I understand a lot of people don't think it's necessary, especially when you're talking about friends and family members. In some places, you can transfer weapons so long as it's to a direct relative or things like that. I'm not the biggest opponent of those ideas. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but I do understand why people are scared that you will see these grains of sand making a heap, and eventually you will get more and more cumbersome laws, and there's already too many in the books. I have to be completely honest. Recently, I've been calling around numerous departments to get clarification on different state gun control laws to understand what these bills do and what they mean. And you will not get a unified answer. That is a problem. I think we need to get rid of state level laws. Hear me out. Just wait. I know the right are screaming and cheering, say, yes, get rid of all of them. And the left is saying, what are you, nuts, Tim? No, hold on. I think you got to get rid of them. And you've got to write some uniform policies that pertain to everybody that we all agree on, that we absolutely agree on. I tend to lean more towards you should all be allowed to keep and bear arms because, I'm sorry, the Constitution guarantees that right. The right to defense, the right to defend yourself, the right to hunting or sportsmanship or whatever. Second Amendment is not about hunting. It is about defending yourself and a free state. And if they have a problem with it, well, then amend the Constitution. It'll never happen, right? Exactly. So instead, they create laws that supersede this, essentially, and I think it's wrong. I don't like it. I had this revelation when someone commented on a video, and they basically said, I'm okay with certain, restrictions on guns and gun control. And they said, okay, well, I agree with you on that regard. So then can I have restrictions on your speech? And I said, no, I get your point. You have to amend the Constitution if you want these changes to take place. But it seems like in every different state, they have violated the Constitution in a variety of reasons. I'll give you a very simple reason. I'll give you a very simple example. It says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's in the Constitution. Nothing else matters. They say a well-regulated militia. No. The right to keep and bear arms. That means you should be allowed to bear it, walking around with it. But many states don't allow you to even have one. It's almost impossible in some states to even get a concealed carry permit. You need some kind of justification. Why? It says you have a right to bear that weapon. The Constitution is being violated in this capacity. And if you don't like it, I'm sorry. I mean, it's just true. Amend the Constitution if that's your issue. It doesn't happen. Instead, we see manipulative and nefarious plots. We see people willing to exploit a crisis, just like I mentioned with COVID. We recently saw Gavin Newsom in California say we're not going to return to normal, even if the pandemic ends, because normal means inequity. Never let a good crisis go to waste. Now that crime is skyrocketing because of the pandemic, and crime is skyrocketing because of the defunding of police, you are now going to see all of these stories used as justification for more gun control. Trying to have a conversation with somebody about why these measures don't work, it's tough, but you have to be respectful. So this is what I request of all of the gun owners out there, is to just let people understand it simply and kindly, and they just really don't get it. Like I mentioned with that Facebook post where they said, that no self-respecting hunter would use an assault weapon. Ask them what an assault weapon means. Or, you don't even got to do that. I just simply responded with, so I guess the issue here is that assault weapon is not defined. It's defined different ways, state by state and federally, and it's hard to understand what it really is. They also interchangeably use the phrase assault rifle and assault weapon. And I think generally a lot of people have good intentions. They just want people to stop being murdered, and I respect that. But they're being taken advantage of by politicians who won't tell you the truth and just want to scare you to exploit you out of your vote. I'll tell you this. Go to any one of these, lefty liberal types. Leftists, I'll remind you, are very pro 2A. No, like legit, like the Antifa people, they love guns. These are really the establishment liberals. Tell them that politicians are lying to you to extract your vote, and that you agree that we don't want people, to die. Now let's talk about how we solve this problem. You will find many people willing to have a real conversation, unless, of course, they're like a grifter, I guess. I think most people have good intentions. But I do think a lot of people are drama and rage driven. If you can have a real conversation with someone, I think we can actually make progress. When someone on the left says to me, the liberal types, we have to stop these mass murderers and these shooters and these killers, I just say, you're absolutely right. What can I do to help you? And then when they come to me and say, we need to ban this, or this, I say, okay, I hear you. Interesting. Did you know X, Y, and Z? And then show them some links. Some people don't want to hear it. Some people are more interested in tribalism, and the conversations go nowhere. Some people try to use these stories as weapons, but I feel there's a lot of people who just don't care. A lot of people want tribal victories, and a lot of people are authoritarians who don't want you to have the right to bear arms. I'll give you an example of the danger in the tribalism. The Gravel Institute. They try to be a left-wing version of PragerU. That's what they're trying to build themselves as. Well, they made a post where they said what happened in D.C. on the 6th was bad only because it was the right that did it. And they said if the left did it, they would actually approve of it. You see, that's the problem. I don't believe any group is morally superior based on their ideology. I believe in protecting the individual liberties of everybody. And that means Christians and Muslims are both allowed to bear arms in this country. They're both allowed to practice their religion. It means the left is allowed to bear arms. And the right is allowed to bear arms. And it also means there are going to be people who will lie, cheat, and steal to take power and pretend like they should be the ones who only have that right. They'll claim you should be censored, but they should not be. They'll claim that if they do it, it's good, but if you do it, it's bad. And that's why you have to watch out for what the Democrats are proposing with a lot of these bills. We are better off when we can all equally bear arms. We are. There are some issues because in very dense population areas, you will have problems if everybody is walking around with weapons and these people don't have training. I'll say this for all the gun owners and all the conservatives. Imagine what it would be like if all of these Democrats who have no idea how guns work all of a sudden had them and are walking around with them. Not going to be pretty. Y'all need to get training courses, I'll tell you that. But I want to point out that many of these Democrats have armed security. And while they're proposing these gun control measures, pushing these stories and pushing this propaganda, they're guarded. They're allowed to bear arms, but you're not. It doesn't make sense. I learned this growing up in Chicago. My dad used to talk about it. He didn't like the idea. And he wasn't the biggest, gun guy. But he was just like, these politicians walk around with guns and armed guards and then say, we're not allowed to have them. And I'm like, that's kind of messed up. It is kind of messed up. Why should only the police, why should only the state, the authority, have the right to bear arms? That's not what this country was based on. Anyway, I digress. It turned into a bigger gun control thing, I'll be honest, because the Democrats did just pass this bill. But my bigger fear is media manipulation. That's freaky, isn't it? All these identical stories. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at youtube.com/TimcastIRL at 8 p.m. So come hang out. You can super chat and we'll read your comments, and we will see you all then.